Hello everyone and welcome to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and with Corey.
Hello, everybody.
And Unlocking Your Truth is a weekly talk show about metaphysics and spirituality, and we broadcast across the Fraser Valley on 101.7 FM from the unceded territory of the Stolo Nation. And of late, we are also live streaming on our Awaken Your Psychic Abilities Facebook group and live streaming to our YouTube channel as well. Unlocking Your Truth is a talk show about metaphysics and spirituality, and we love to talk about all sorts of topics under the general umbrella of metaphysics, spirituality, intuition, energy healing, and all of those kinds of things. And our goal is to inspire you to explore and discover more for yourself and educate you as well, and hopefully entertain you a little bit. That's what Corey's for. All right, well, this week, I thought that what we might talk about is some common misconceptions when it comes to developing intuition. Seemed like a good topic. I have a whole chapter about that in my book, Intuition and Chakras, which is coming out in April. And so I just picked really just a few of them, 2 or 3. And so before I begin with these misconceptions, I thought it might make sense to just have a, like, what is intuition? What from my perspective is intuition? And intuition is your spiritual communication system. Like, you have a physical communication system, don't you? Which consists of your physical senses and your physical body. Well, you have a spiritual communication system as well. And whereas your physical senses give you access to 3-dimensional reality, to the physical world, your intuitive senses give you access to multi-dimensional, non-physical reality. Now, that might sound a bit way out there, but it's not. And it's not a spooky gift that only a few people have. We all have it because we are all spirit. And therefore, we have a spiritual communication system, which is our intuition. Now, it seems alien to most people because most of us have forgotten this part of ourselves. We've come down into the physical world, into a physical body. We focused very much on our physical senses, on our emotions, on our intellect, because we have to interact with 3-dimensional reality. So one reason is just by the fact of coming into a physical body, you've got all of these loud signals that you're interacting with, and it changes your focus. It shifts your focus away from the spiritual and into the physical 3D reality. Other reasons why people have lost touch with their spiritual communication system, which is their intuition, is just the programming in our culture doesn't always support or cultivate it. And not only that, even those who are beginning to discover it and use it perhaps don't understand it completely, have an incomplete picture about what they're doing. So as a consequence, there are lots of misunderstandings about intuition. So like I said, I just picked out 3 from my book, and I chose the ones that are really more to do with when people are first encountering intuition or first starting to explore the idea of intuition. And so thinking about that, some of the first things that come up for most people when they're exploring the idea of being psychic is using tarot cards, oracle decks, the idea about using a crystal ball to gaze into a crystal ball to see the future, playing with runes, or even things like Ouija boards. These are common things that people dabble in when they first get interested in being psychic and when they first get interested in intuition. And so what can happen is that there's a belief that the magic or the message is within this object, right? So the thing that's special is the object, is the card deck, is the runes, is some other ancient form of doing divination and doing readings. And so the newbie, let's call them, believes that they just have to understand, just have to interpret what this object is saying or what's coming through this object, a bit like having to decipher a foreign language. And so often they'll get a deck of cards and they will study a book that comes with it and even try to memorize the meanings of the cards so that when the cards come up, then they can bring forward what the meaning of the card is. And so there's a few things that are, what's the word? I don't like to say the word wrong, but there are a few things about that mean that intuition is not going to be working at its best capacity. Because the intuition is within the reader, it's not within the object. And so let's imagine that you pick a tarot card. If you're using a book to tell you what it means, or if you're using your memory because you've memorized the book, then you're using your intellect to reference some standard interpretation that's written about the card or the rune or whatever it is. Now let's do it in a different way. You take the card and you look at the images on the card and allow yourself to just be drawn into the colors and symbols that are represented on the card. Different things are going to jump out at you, and you're going to focus in on different aspects of the card. But that approach, where just being open to any interpretation coming through, is more about using your intuition. And you could pull the same card for two people and be drawn to completely different aspects within the symbology of the card. And you might get a completely different meaning for two different people from the same card. So it doesn't necessarily always mean the same thing. So really what any of these paraphernalia that people use when they first start dabbling in this are acting as a kind of a gateway or a portal or a permission slip of some kind for the person doing the reading to connect with their own intuition. So what's really happening is the thing is stimulating the intuition and helping the reader to access their own intuition. And, there are different reasons why someone who's a more skilled reader might choose to use these things. One really good one is because the client also, they believe that the magic is in the object. Their attention will be focused on the object. And that can sometimes make it easier for the reader to do the reading. Because sometimes people have got really powerful energy that can interfere with the reader's sixth chakra if the reader doesn't know how to handle that. So misconception number one that I'm talking about tonight is really like, where is the intuitive information coming from? It's coming from you. You're the one with the intuition. And any of these other things, they're just tools that we can use to access the intuition. So if anyone who's watching on any of our channels has dabbled in those kinds of things, please tell us in the chat about your experiences with them.
I've chatted, blah, 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 blah.
You want to share?
Do I want to share? I don't know. I find that in the past year or so, after reading a lot of the posts and the radio shows we've been doing on psychic abilities, I've noticed that I have traits of a lot of the different psychic abilities, especially the four clairs. And it's very interesting. I always knew I had a little bit of a psychic gift, but um, never really anything special. But it's amazing when you really start to look at it, and especially like when I did the quiz, the psychic quiz that we have on the website, it really opened up the concept that I do have psychic abilities in more than one.
Yes, and everybody does.
I
Like
know.
I said, it's how we communicate as spirit, and we're all spirit. It's just that when we're embedded in the physical world, we tend to focus on our physical senses more than our spiritual senses. And we come into, most of us, into a culture or a family situation where we're not sort of validated or encouraged to cultivate that. It's more like, well, it's your imagination and you'll grow out of it. So then we sort of have to circle back. And like I said, one of the most common things that people do is play with things like tarot cards and runes and I guess dreams, and keeping a dream diary is another common way in for people. And all of these things are great at helping you remember your intuition, but you're the one with the intuition, not the object. And so another common belief about psychics is that what psychics do is they predict the future. That's what they do. So if you go to a psychic to get your future read. And so that's probably what most people believe about psychics, isn't it? So let's examine that belief a little bit. Let's talk about that. So, what I believe is that most people, they like that idea that the future is predetermined. They like the idea that something magic could happen and all their troubles would go away. And they don't really want to believe that they create their reality. We are spirit. We communicate through our intuition. We create our own reality. But as soon as you accept the belief that you create your own reality, then you're faced with the idea that you have to then take responsibility for your life. And that's where a lot of people fall down. They don't want to be responsible for their lives. They don't want to look at their life and say, all of these things that suck that I'm really not enjoying and I wish would change, and I want somebody to tell me they are going to change. They don't want those to be, they don't want to be the point of causation for that reality that they are encountering. And yet the truth is they are. We create our reality through the energy that we are. And we either do it consciously and become conscious creators, or we do it unconsciously.
Which most people do.
Which most people do, and then they don't like what's showing up in their reality. And maybe they go to visit a psychic and they say, I'm very lonely. When will I meet my husband? My job sucks. When will I get a new job? I don't have enough money. When will I have money? I don't like where I live. When am I going to move into a new house? And I will say it is possible to predict the future. It is. It can be done. It's not particularly helpful though. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If I predict your future, depending on you, it's got the potential to take away your power from you and to limit your freedom of choice, especially if you believe everything I say. If you really believe in everything I say, and I tell you you're going to meet your husband in 6 months' time, then you will be focused on that belief. Your energy will be focused on that belief. And so, I mean, maybe that wasn't the best example, but I mean, I think you get the point. It interferes with somebody's free will, and it may actually cause them to create a future that they otherwise might not have done. It also stops them taking responsibility for their own creations, because now they're believing it's fate. It's something that comes from outside of me and land, and is delivered into my world. And
I have a prediction.
it's a break time.
It's time for a break. Sorry to interrupt, but
Good one. So, listeners, you've been tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey. And we've been talking about some misconceptions about being psychic, just clarifying a few things about that, especially for people who are first coming into this idea of um, being psychic. So we're going to have some advertisements, and we will be back after the advertisements have played out. Welcome back, listeners. You are tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and with Corey.
that's me.
And every week we talk about different topics under the umbrella of metaphysics and spirituality. We broadcast from civl.ca on 101.7 FM. And also we're live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. Tonight we're talking about things that people believe about being psychic that may not be exactly correct, or at the very least may not be very helpful to them. And before we went to the break, we were talking about how people tend to have this idea that going to see a psychic is so that you can have your future read. They will tell you your future.
Edgar Casey said something very interesting. I mean, he's known as the sleeping prophet because he used to go into trance. But what he said, that prophecy or a prophet, the only reason that you should listen to a prophetic message is to decide whether or not you want to change it, because a prophecy is only, the best thing about a prophecy, it gives you the ability to create the future you want to see. He says, if you see something bad coming down the way or something, untowards that you want to, that it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It's just the ability, you now have the ability to recognize that it may happen. So now you can do the things to avoid that happening. It's not set in stone. It's not set in, it's not written. It's just a suggestion that might happen in that timeline.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I can give you a really extreme example of that, actually. When I was doing my psychic training about 20 years ago now, there was a class of us and we were learning to do all sorts of things. And one of the things that our teacher got us to do was look at our own death, look at how we died, when we died, and how we died. So we all got to do this, not really a prediction. We actually looked at what was going to happen. And then she said, well, and if you see something you don't like, go ahead and change it. I was quite happy with mine, but my friend saw that she died in a car crash at the age of 35. And she said, well, actually, I've changed my mind about that. And she changed it. And so I completely agree with what you said. You can look at what is the most likely trajectory of your future time self. And then you can course correct if you don't like the way that that is headed. But it's certainly not true that it is something that is set in stone. And that's the problem that comes up when people go for a future time psychic reading, right? They all of a sudden, they're like, this is what's going to happen. Their energy is focusing on that. So they can end up creating it, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether they want it or not. So they can end up creating that as a future that happens, even though they might not have really wanted to choose it. And like I was talking about, it stops people taking responsibility for their creations, because it feeds into the belief that life is something that happens to you. Fate is something that's real, and there's nothing you can do about it. This is, you know, how life works, when the opposite is true.
I have a comment from someone on our YouTube channel. They say that curious soul, this is curious soul that's talking. I think that's George. Responsibility about your own reality is a good point. Long time ago, a psychic told me that I will have a journey to see my parents, which worried me that I will have to go and see them. So I did make sure I will not follow that prediction. Maybe there's an infinite number of variables and versions of the future, so the future readers can see one of these versions so we can make choices.
Yeah, it's absolutely correct, George. And in fact, I was going to go on and talk about that in just a moment. And I will. There's a couple of points that, so if you're not taking responsibility for yourself, then a future time prediction, let's say we say something silly like you're going to get run over by a bus next week, and you believe it, then you're not going to do anything to transform yourself, to change your energy, to heal yourself, because you're going to have this fatalistic attitude to life. And George is exactly right. Anytime anyone predicts your future, it's only ever based on the most likely possibility, depending on how your energy is right here, right now. So it can be right and it can be wrong, because your energy at the time you see the reader might be a very good reader, you know, and your energy is saying, well, this is the trajectory I'm headed on. And so they will make that future time prediction. Well, 1 hour later, you could change your energy completely, and therefore change your future completely. So George is correct. There are infinite possibilities, kind of like imagine the branches of a tree. Everything you want, everything you don't want lies before you somewhere in this probability matrix, somewhere in this tree. And the path that you're going to weave through those branches of the tree is based on you and your energy right here, right now. Right here, right now, present time reality is the point of power. That's where your point of focus is this lifetime. And so any prediction of your future is based on the most likely probability given your current energy, intentions, beliefs, desires, and all of that. So I sometimes get people who are like, maybe the first time they come for a reading, that's what they're there for. They want me to predict their future. And I very rarely do it. Occasionally I do. But because the reason I don't is because I believe in free will. I believe in your ability to consciously create your reality. I want to encourage people to realize that and practice that, and consciously be in charge of their lives. And all of my courses are all geared to help to do that and to use your intuition to do that. But on the rare occasion that I do predict the future, I will assign a probability to it. Like, I'm seeing this, I would say 65% that's likely to happen. So I never say this is what it's going to be, because I think I don't want to disempower people. I don't want to limit their creativity. And I certainly don't want to prevent them from taking responsibility for themselves and their life.
That's a little like saying my way or the highway.
Yeah. All right, so I had one other thing that I pulled out of that chapter in my book that was talking about misconceptions about psychics. And by the way, folks, if you are interested in the book, it's called Intuition and Chakras. It's being published by Llewellyn on the 8th of April, but it is now available for pre-order. And there is a page on my website under products where you can look at the book. But if you wait for about another week to buy it, another week or so, round about the 15th of April, there's going to be a digital swag pack. For people who pre-ordered the book, they get some really cool stuff. So I'll mention it next week on the show as well, but start taking a look at that book because there's also going to be some competitions coming down the line and everything with some really cool prizes.
Do I get the swag pack too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice.
You can have it tonight if you want. I'll send
Oh, now everybody's going to be jealous. George also says, today I could sense few people's thoughts before they spoke.
Very cool. That's telepathy. Very, very cool. Yeah, you can Google in our podcast, George, for shows we've done on telepathy. We've talked about that a couple of times. That's also in the book. I'm going to become a book bore and say everything's in my book. All right. So the one other thing that I thought that I would mention tonight, and it's something that you know, if you make this choice to be out there in the world, being intuitive, you will encounter at some point. And that is, there are people that believe psychics are evil and psychics are doing the work of the devil. And that belief, it comes from religious, cultural programming. And obviously it's not true. But we've got a really rich history of psychics being punished for being psychic, haven't we? So, and I'm sure most of you who are interested in this kind of stuff have experienced past lives where you have been punished for it. You know, the witches, they were put on the ducking stool, burned at the stake, and all that kind of gruesome endings for people. So people are afraid of what they don't understand. And it's funny because what they're afraid of is something that's part of themselves, but they don't know that it is. So, yeah, so it's scary to some people, this psychic stuff. And the other thing that I sort of often think about is, you know, we've got all these different words for intuitive people: psychic, medium, intuitive, gifted, sensitive, empathic, extrasensory. Gosh, there's probably more I could think of. And they all used to describe people with intuition. And depending on what word you use, it comes with a different energy charge. All words that we use in our language have an energy charge on them. So, for example, you know, if you say the word psychic, then some religious groups take that to mean that you're engaged in the work of the devil if you're a psychic. If you say the word medium, then even though that person is being psychic, we have a different concept. Okay, well, they're trying to help people whose loved ones have passed away and you know, bring messages, and you know, that's maybe more of a good thing, although talking to the dead to some people might not be. You know, and so there are all sorts of different concepts, aren't there, about being psychic. I personally use the word intuitive because it seems to cause a bit less affront with people, and it just I do.
Well, George is saying that his coworker keeps telling him to stay away from psychics. He's very religious and rule-based type of thinking.
And I think it's hilarious because if you look back at really any of the great spiritual teachers that we follow, and Jesus is a really great example, he was a spiritual master, he was psychic, and he was an energy healer. I mean, he was very advanced in terms of his psychic abilities. You know, if you're levitating on, walking on water, or you're, you know, manufacturing wine and loaves and fishes, that's that's very, very advanced psychic abilities, actually, telekinetic abilities. And he was able to read people, and he was able to give healings to people. And it's funny because they will accept, they will accept that Jesus could do those things because he is the Son of God. And yet the true meaning of him being the Son of God was that we're all sons of God. We're all aspects of divine consciousness. We all have these gifts and abilities. When he's, you know, I am the way, I am the light, or any way that he's saying, follow me, he's basically just saying, I'm demonstrating the way that you can be an awakened human. And you can do these things that I can do as well. So I think it would be a good time to start answering some of our readers' questions. And I did put a post in the Facebook group earlier to ask people to post some things in advance. I don't know whether you saw that, Corey, but we got some good questions.
No, I didn't see that, actually.
I've got them up on my screen. So we got some good questions and about intuition. And one of them was from Brianna. And she says, actually, I thought she'd done 2 posts, but I'm only seeing one right now. But she says, when I'm visualizing in a meditation, am I seeing into another realm? Or is it just my mind creating these visuals? So that's a really good question. And I will look at that specifically for you, Brianna. But I would say both of those things actually can be true. And both of those things can be your clairvoyance. Let's take a look. So whenever we have a form of intuition that's visual, that's the clairvoyance. And clairvoyance can be images, colors, symbols. And you can use your clairvoyance to see into another realm. You could use your clairvoyance, for example, this is one that's quite common for me. Somebody will come and say, I've been having terrible dreams and nightmares. And so I will look in their astral out-of-body experiences. So with my clairvoyance. So that's like looking into another realm. Or somebody will want me to talk to their spirit guides, and that's like looking into another realm. So we can focus our clairvoyance to look into another realm. We can also project mental images using our clairvoyance. So for example, when I train my students in developing their clairvoyance, we get them to create mental image pictures. So they're the one, we could say, create the mental image picture of a dog or a cat or a flower. And it is the same equipment as when you're reading with your clairvoyance. And so, but you are creating thought forms and then looking at the thought forms with your clairvoyance. So Brianna, it can be both of those things, and it probably is both of those things. And I wonder whether you are purposefully visualizing specific things you don't say, or whether you're just going into a state of relaxation and things are appearing. And so if you're going into a state of relaxation and things are appearing, well, you may very well be starting to tune into, in inverted commas, another reality or another realm. If you are doing a deliberate visualization, you know, like when people count sheep when they fall asleep, then that's a mental image picture that they're projecting using their clairvoyance.
Well,
So,
I have another prediction, Leslie.
you
Dr.
do?
Leslie. Yes, that within 20 seconds we'll be going for another break.
That sounds good. Listeners, you're tuning into Unlocking Your Truth, and we will be back after these messages. Hello to everyone on Facebook, by the way. All right. Listeners, welcome back to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey. And tonight we're talking about intuition. And actually, we're talking about misconceptions about intuition in the first part of the show. And now we're answering your questions to help clarify and intuition for you. And there's a lady called Jennifer who has asked, how do regular Reiki sessions affect intuition? And that's also a really good question. And I want to say it this way, that healing helps intuition. If the healing is cleansing, clearing your chakra system, cleansing, clearing your energy field, then it will assist your intuition. Because the clearer your energy field, the clearer your chakras, the clearer your intuition, because the chakras are the conduits for intuition, and the energy field is kind of like the window that you're looking out at the world through. And so if you've got a dirty window and a clogged up channel, then your intuition is not going to be very clear at all. And so in general, receiving energy healings is going to help your intuition. And I always say as well that the path of the intuitive, it's a double path. You've got one foot focused on yourself and healing yourself, and one foot focused on developing your intuition. They coexist. You can't really have one without the other. You have to be healing yourself, digging deeply, cleansing out the dense negative energies within yourself in order to everything in your energy field and your chakra system to start functioning properly and to have clarity. So I'd say regular Reiki sessions, if you've got a really good neutral healer that's delivering them, will help your intuition. And doing your own personal self-healing, or even if you're doing the Reiki on yourself, it should help your intuition. All right, so any other questions been posted, Corey? There is another one from George here.
There is?
Yeah, he posted it earlier. Regarding intuition, is it related to channeling from entities? Are the thoughts coming from our higher selves, or where do they come from if they are not made up by our brains? And actually that little piece about the brain, it connects with Brianna's question in that we engage the brain to interpret and communicate what we're seeing with the intuition. So we're translating actually, through different body spirit interfaces to explain, talk about what we're getting intuitively. Anyway, so I'll go on with his question and then I'll answer it. What makes the information come to the physical world and why? In his case, he senses future events more than the past. Is it possible that some people who passed away want to send information? Well, there's lots of questions in there. Maybe I should just break it down one by one. Okay, channeling. So it depends on my definition of channeling. Would be when you, okay, so let's talk about channeling. Channeling, one of the definitions of channeling is that you are bringing through another being. So instead of connecting with your, okay, let's say it this way. You can channel your higher self. You can channel God. Okay, so you can use your trance mediumship to channel yourself your higher consciousness, and God. So when I read, that's what I'm doing. I'm channeling my higher consciousness. Some people channel another being. And for those who channel another being, some of those beings seem to be benevolent and bring teachings and cool information through. Some of them might be pretending to be that, but really they're not. And at the other extreme of the spectrum there, we've got possession, where you've got a non-benevolent being, which is somebody is channeling. So a discussion about intuition, George, yes, we could expand it to include talking about channeling. If we think about intuition as I defined it at the beginning, which is your spiritual communication system, if you're channeling another being, you're using your spiritual system to let someone else come in and use your apparatus. It's not really you. So, and then he's saying, are the thoughts coming from our higher selves, or where do they come from? Preferably, yes. And one of the things about developing your intuition is to be able to discern, this is my information. This is coming from God. This is my information. And this is my trusted guide that I work with all the time and I really trust, or this is some other being. So it can come from all of these different places, and your job is to learn how to be discerning about who to listen to. Are they made up by our brains? Well, the brain the intellect will often interfere with the intuition and will cause you to question and doubt the intuition. And you find yourself asking questions like this: is this really my brain? And if you're asking, is this really my brain? It's your brain. Because if it's your intuition, it's not going to question, it's just going to feel right and true. What makes the information come to the physical world, and why? So that's an interesting question, isn't it? And we tend to think that we are pinched off from the greater part of ourselves in the physical world, right? We've pinched ourselves off from the greater part of ourselves. But all of that information is accessible to us when we awaken our intuition. So it's not that information is suddenly deciding to come into the physical world. It's here, we're shut off from it. So it's when we open up to it that we can access it and be aware of it. Let's see. Is it possible that people who've passed away want to send information about what they worked on or something they learned? Sure. There can be all sorts of reasons why people who've passed on might want to communicate with people who are still alive, and they do. Yeah, and use people in the physical world to channel their ideas. Yeah, they work with us all the time. We've all got many, many guides who are helping us with our creativity and helping us to create our lives. We've all got a team of people who are working with us in that way and helping us become aware of information. Well, so thank you for that, all those questions, George. Corey, are there anybody else posted a question for me in the Facebook group or?
No, not that I've seen.
All right.
It's a very quiet group out there tonight.
Well, it's your chance, people. I can keep on wittering on about beliefs people have about being psychic, or you can ask your questions.
What's the weirdest or most unusual psychic ability people work with? Like what happened? Like, who has anybody ever come to you with one of the weird, like not the weird psychic abilities, but the more unusual psychic abilities. And how does that, like, do you have
Yeah.
an experience with something like that?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because if you read about in Hinduism, the psychic abilities, they're called siddhis, and they write in their spiritual teachings about how these are developed and that there's different stages, you know. So there are certain psychic abilities that show up earlier on the path, and others that show up, tend to show up further down the line. So, for example, telekinesis. We were talking about Jesus earlier. You know, the gurus who levitate, who manifest things out of thin air and things like that. I would say that's one of the more unusual psychic abilities in terms of how many people on the planet today have that kind of capability. Not many. Have I ever encountered people with that? Yes, I have, but not in the sense of people who have mastery over it, like Jesus, for example. And my favorite example is I had somebody who was coming to see me for a reading and they were late. And they showed up quite late and they said, I'm really, really sorry, but I've got this thing going on in my life right now where I get, because they lived in Vancouver, they took the bus. Every time I get on the bus breaks down. I can't get on a bus and get anywhere because I go on the bus and the bus breaks down. And on her way to see me, she got on a bus, it broke down. They sent another bus, she got on that bus, it broke down. And so she was just having this nightmare reality where she couldn't get anywhere. And it turned out that she had all of this telekinetic energy that was just arcing off of her into the mechanism of the bus. And it was her energy that was interfering with the bus. And so we just did some work with her, helping her learn how to ground. And you hear me talking about grounding on the show a lot, because what grounding will do is it will help diffuse excess energy. So instead of having this energy arcing off, then it could go down her grounding, and that solved her problem. So I would say that maybe that might be one of the more unusual ones. Oh, I have another one, and this one's in my book. I was at a party. You were there, Corey, but I don't think you were in this conversation. And I met this lady who used to be in the intelligence services, and she, which is not really part of the story, but interesting anyway, she'd retired from it. And since she'd retired from it, she had started having waking visions and precognitive dreams about terrorist attacks. And they were happening so frequently, she started telling people who were close to her because she wanted to have some validation that this was happening. And so she would tell them, I've had this vision, or I've had this, and then it would happen. And people, you know, she had the proof because she told somebody before it happened. And so she'd sort of predicted there was a terrorist attack in Ottawa in Canada with a man going into Parliament with a gun, for example. She saw that ahead of time. There was a terrorist attack in Tunisia, which she had this experience where in a dream she was sitting in the body of, I think it was more than one person who were actually there at the hotel where the attack took place, and experiencing it through their eyes. And then then it happened and it was on the news, and she watched a news program where the person who she'd been in was being interviewed. and they were being interviewed about their experience of the event, which she had experienced as though it was her, and been in the body of that person when it was happening. So that's kind of an interesting one. And maybe another one is we have a friend who used to own a metaphysical store, and she used to get people to come and do talks, and she had a guy bring crystal skulls and he lent her a crystal skull, and she slept with it by the side of her bed, and it was one of the genuine ancient crystal skulls. And she went to sleep. She woke up in the morning, she had a shower, had her breakfast, started, going on with her day. And then she realized there was a green glow coming from the bedroom, and she went in the bedroom, and this crystal skull was like beaming all this green light. And she was like, that's weird. And then she was like, oh my God, I'm not awake, I'm asleep. So she sort of was back in bed asleep, realizing she was asleep. And then she got up again, had her breakfast, had a shower, did all of that, then realized that green glow is still here. And this happened like many times in a loop, on and on and on and on, a bit like Groundhog Day. And even today she says, well, I'm awake now, or am I? Because it was so real that she thought she was awake, but she wasn't. So
I often ask that question about her too. Is she awake or not? I have another comment on the lady with working for the intelligence service. She says maybe that woman working in the intelligence field was tuned into the energies of those who had that type of mindset, because she probably learned from interviews.
Yes, I agree. I think that was where her mind was, because that's the work that she'd been doing. And actually, now that she's been retired a number of years, it doesn't really happen that much anymore, because I guess she's shifted her consciousness, and that's not. So good point.
Yes, good for her too. That it's not happening that much anymore. That must be a pain to have to live with one of those, worrying about.
Yeah, and I think people can start to think they've got some kind of responsibility, which she didn't. She just thought it was happening because it was teaching her about consciousness and how we're all connected, and that the message really was about oneness and how we're all one, and it was a healing message. That was how she looked at what was happening to her, which I think is a good way to look at it.
In review, if you were to say, what are the three, very quickly, because we only have a couple of minutes left, what are the three top myths?
The three top myths. Oh, good one. Because I chose three kind of under a theme, but the top ones, maybe some that are slightly more sophisticated, but I encounter them a lot because I'm training people in intuition, is you have to open all your chakras wide open. That the answer is open all up, your chakras all up. And that's not the answer. Because spiritual mastery is more about understanding what experience of reality you're going to get if you open or close things. And what experience of reality do you want to have? And then you can configure your chakra system consciously to have that experience of reality. So a lot of people are there meditating going, I've got to open all my chakras. And that can actually end up bombarding you with an enormous amount of information and an enormous amount of irrelevant information. And it can be quite crazy making. So it's better to just learn about each chakra by exploring yourself and what happens when this is more open or more closed. So that's
Dr. Leslie, unfortunately, that's about it.
Well, that's my top one then.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, folks. It's been a pleasure, and we'll be back here on Unlocking Your Truth next Tuesday from 7 to 8 Pacific time, talking about intuition again. And please join our Awaken Your Psychic Abilities Facebook group. Go in there and post what you want us to talk about, because we're more than willing to talk about anything that you want us to. See you next week.
Bye now.
Okie dokie.